Rise and join Deputy Mayor Herbert in the salute to the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, next item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. If there are no modifications, the agenda will stand approved as written. Citizen comments. This is an opportunity for you to express your views on issues that are important to you and to the community. We please ask that you limit your comments to 3 minutes. And there will be a timer on the screen to help remind you. Clerk, please call the first person.
Mayor, there's nobody signed up.
Nobody signed up? Nobody wishing to be heard? All right, next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
And I'll second. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor of passing the consent agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Consent agenda is passed unanimously. Next item on the agenda is the public hearing for ordinance number 19-0493, authorizing the acquisition by negotiation or condemnation of certain real property interests needed for Juanita Drive Northeast Pedestrian Bicycle Safety Improvement Project. Mr. Vaughn, our senior civil engineer, if you would please.
Yes. Good evening, Mayor and Council. We're here to consider adoption of the Juanita Drive Pedestrian and Bicycle Safety Project condemnation ordinance to allow eminent domain, if necessary, to obtain needed property rights. Currently, the status of the Juanita Drive project is 90% design is complete. City permitting is under review, and right-of-way process started in late 2018 and is ongoing. It's the city's intent to ensure that the property owners are fairly compensated for the value of the property. Property acquisitions affect 24 individual parcels along the corridor, consisting of 7 strip parcel acquisitions, 2 permanent slope easements, and 19 temporary construction easements. Property valuations are now complete, and formal offers will be sent out later this month. Eminent domain will only be used if negotiations reach an impasse. It's considered the last resort, and it's to remain on schedule for construction in 2020. It'll be filed if property owners refuse to grant possession and use of the property, and if filed, courts stipulate possession and use of the property and determine the final compensation unless both parties reach a settlement beforehand. All affected property owners are included in the ordinance for efficiency and to not single out any of the individual property owners. And certified letters were sent out to affected property owners to notify them of tonight's proceedings. So if there are no questions, we could just proceed with the public comment.
This is the way we've handled all of our construction projects.
Correct.
On the road corridors.
Yeah.
I don't think we've had to use it yet, but it gives us the ability to move on. And
We used it once with West A, but we reached a settlement before we actually had to go to court.
Right. But it gives us the ability to use and start during the construction process, right?
Yeah, as long as we have possession and use,
There you go. That's what I meant, possession and use.
we get the rights to use the property, and then negotiations continue on
Right.
into 2020 until
But
we reach
without
a
this, we
settlement.
don't get possession and use.
Correct.
All right, any other questions? So, is there a motion to,
It's a public hearing.
oh, that's right. Is anybody wishing to speak?
There's nobody signed up.
Anybody wishing to be heard on the acquisition by negotiation or condemnation of certain real property interests needed for the Juanita Drive in Northeast Pedestrian Bicycle Safety Improvement Project? Anybody wishing to be heard? Anybody wishing to be heard on ordinance number 19-0493, authorizing the acquisition by negotiation or condemnation of certain real property interests needed for the Juanita Drive Northeast Pedestrian Bicycle Safety Improvement Project? Seeing no one coming forward, the public hearing is closed. Now, Chair will entertain a motion to adopt ordinance number 19-0493, authorizing the acquisition by negotiation or condemnation of certain real property interests needed for the Juanita Drive Northeast Pedestrian and Bicycle Safety Improvement Project. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion, any questions? Hearing none, seeing none, will the clerk please take the roll?
Councilmember Smith? Deputy Mayor Herbig?
Yes.
Mayor Baker?
Yes.
Councilmember Shrevenick?
Yes.
Councilmember Marshall?
Yes.
Councilmember Curtis?
Yes.
Councilmember Danuski?
Yes.
Passed.
All right, next item on the agenda is authorize the city manager to enter into a contract with O'Connor Consulting Group, LLC, to conduct a feasibility study on an alternate Lake Point project. Mr. Hampson, Development Services Director.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, Council. So yeah, as you mentioned, we're looking for authorization from the City Council to enter into a contract agreement with the O'Connor Group. As you remember, back in February of this year, Widener Apartment Homes gave us their final notification that they were no longer pursuing the Lake Point project. So after they gave us that notice, we're kind of stepping back a little bit and taking a look at some different opportunities. You know, it's been 20 plus years, numerous different developers trying to look at a large parcel, a project for that parcel. And so during the feasibility study that we did in 2018 with HR&A, we consulted with Brian O'Connor from O'Connor Group, and he was very helpful through that whole process. He put some realistic numbers behind some of our data that we needed. He has been pretty familiar with the property since it originally became a redevelopment site. So he has worked on the property before for previous developers. I actually read a 2000 feasibility study he did back in the Callison plan. So he's really familiar with it, and so he's seen a lot of the developers come and go over the years. And he's kind of has a different mindset when it comes to Lake Point. And it's one that we would like to pursue, and that's a less density project, different uses. But we don't know what I don't want to say sweet spot because we use that word a lot during the HR&A study, but we don't know what the best project is for that site. So he would have to do a few different analysis, you know, put some different uses into it, put some different size buildings, different locations, different phases, and try to figure out what would be the best product for the city going forward. So some of the stuff that he would look at doing would include more open public space, because as we know, the property is really hard to develop on because of the situation with the soils. And so we're thinking, well, maybe smaller, less heavy buildings might be the answer. So we've been talking to him, and he thinks that he could do something in a few months for us, put together a plan, but we're looking at about $60,000. He would have to hire sub-consultants, like a geotechnical engineer and a cost estimator. So not all that money is going strictly to his report. That's really the gist of the discussion.
Questions? Councilmember Smith.
Thanks, Brian. I think this is a great idea, and I'm glad we're pursuing this. I have a couple of questions. One is, will any of the HR&A report, does that factor in any way in what he's doing on his end, or is that just water under the bridge, and that's irrelevant as far as the data that was used, the different cost information? And then kind of to piggyback on that is, will he be working with Mr. Sargent at all, and will he have access to the property?
So to answer the, excuse me, the first part of your question, the HRNA information is still relevant. I don't think it's old enough to not be relevant. So some of the numbers may be needed to be looked at again when we're talking about cost estimates. But really what it boils down to is the product. And so if we're looking at putting in a product that was similarly analyzed in the HRNA report, it could be apples to apples. But if we're looking at a product that wasn't necessarily looked at in the HRNA report, it's going to have to be a new estimate or a new analysis. And so I wouldn't say that most of it or all of it or any of it could be irrelevant or relevant for that matter. I think it's just a matter of seeing what the plan or the idea is behind it, and then making the decision on the previous documents that were in place, including environmental documents too. On the second part of your question, we've met with the property owner, Gary Sargent, and while he's not contributing financially to the analysis, he is open to it, and he is willing to allow access to his property with approval and anything like that that's needed. So he has been really open to this idea. I wouldn't say that he has agreed to build whatever comes out of this agreement.
I understand. Thank you.
Councilmember Curtis.
So I have two thoughts. One is, for some time, my concern has been the size of that project and the complexity. When I observe how well we've done with the 9.6 acres the city assembled across the street and how well that's turned out for the city, it feels to me like 10-acre projects are easier to complete than 50-acre projects. So I'm in favor of looking at some options, and there might be some 10-acre blocks that could be developed, and maybe we'll end up with some public space after that. One of my concerns is spending $60,000 for a property we don't own. It's private property. And the way I can justify it in my own mind is if indeed the findings come out like I think they will, and we end up with some more public amenities, park space or otherwise, I think we can justify taking this step because the city will in fact benefit from it.
Councilmember Shrubnik.
Well, and I think to tag on to Councilmember Curtis's comment, I think the other justification that I've been thinking about is, if it saves us in negotiating with a potential developer the extent of the tax abatements that we were looking at, I mean, $60,000 seems like a pretty modest investment if we can save, potentially millions in the long run.
Anybody else? I guess what I'm hoping to see out of this would be a best available use of the land itself, how we can maximize its return, because it's one of the last developable pieces of land of that size, certainly on the lake and definitely within the city. So I'd like to see it generate enough revenue to carry us for a while. Councilmember Marshall.
Yes, in a general sense, developers, of course, are going to have their opinions as to their proposals and their starting points and all that. But generally, how would this then better help the city to have all these facts or this analysis and these numbers?
Well, it's kind of, I wouldn't say starting over, but it's kind of looking at a different perspective. And so it can really help us as a city in a few different ways. One is what should our code have in it? Is there stuff that we need to do to our code to allow somebody to be able to redevelop the property? Another benefited from the city perspective is the trade-offs that we'll be getting in public benefits, hopefully, on a developer. Another thing that could be good too is we'll have a picture to show people. Right now, the only picture that people have in their head are the large CSDP Callison plan. And so if we have a different picture with some supporting data, it might be helpful to have those discussions with developers. You know, and right now, we're talking to developers and we don't really have a picture or a plan in place, not even a plan that shows where we would like to see an infrastructure, a road, or, you know, those types of different infrastructures in place. And so if we just had a better starting point than that Callison plan, you know, 2 double-decker infrastructures and huge buildings and stuff.
Councilmember Curtis.
So I know people like O'Connor are experts in their field, and I don't want to presume to tell them what to do, but I'm hoping one of the options they look at is, what if multiple developers did something? So we had several developers do 10-acre chunks. So I don't think it has to be one development. So I'd at least like them to think about that as an option. And it might just be ridiculous, and they'll say, forget it, but throw it out there anyway.
Well, I've had a few conversations with O'Connor, and I think that his product is not going to be limited to one developer. I think he has an idea too that it'll take multiple developers to pull this off. But what he's going to do differently that hasn't been done in the past, he's going to look at the cost of the land as it sits today, you know, and then take a look at the infrastructure and what it would be cost to get it teed up to be pad ready. And then you could look at really what's going to generate the revenue and the profits. And so that's what's going to be driving what product gets put in place. And then the product itself is going to be developer driven. Developers typically have different areas of expertise, commercial, residential, some have mixed use, but typically they have different areas. And so if we get down and we figure out, hey, this office building, a 5-story office building is going to be the best product here, then we can go out and solicit the office builder developers. And
Councilmember Smith and Deputy Mayor.
Actually, Brian, thanks. You just actually hit on what I was going to say to regarding to Councilmember Marshall's comments about how we, I think, benefit, and I think it's understanding how to take it to the next level and things we can do before even a developer is under contract on it, another developer. But also the other thing I think is a huge benefit is one of the critiques on the HRNA plan was that they always looked at scaling larger to make it financially feasible, and every time they made it bigger, economies of scale worked against us, and it just meant the financial gap was bigger too. And so I love this idea. I think it makes the most sense. And also, do you know in that analysis, because part of it, I mean, a critical component of this is to get the property owner to have a property that's marketable and financially makes financial sense for the property owner. Do you know if this analysis will include a current income analysis on how the use of the non-conforming use now makes it financially viable just to continue on that route? Do you know, is that part of it?
I don't know for sure if it's part of it. It's something that we want it to include, but like you said, the property owner has to have some participation in it. So it's our interest to have that in the initial analysis on the current property valuation.
Okay.
But so we'll talk to the property owner and see exactly how open he is with his leases.
I kind of doubt that we'll be able to do that because the property owner would have to disclose lease and income information, and this would be a public record, and so he probably wouldn't want to do that.
And I totally understand. The only reason I asked the question is because clearly a cash flow has a present value today, and his analysis will probably have different values associated with it. And part of getting to motivating a property owner is to understand there may be more value in doing something else. And that's why I asked. I understand that it's private information, but it does seem like it would be relevant in trying to create the most well-rounded report where we can work with the property owner and try to figure out what the best path forward is, so it's financially feasible.
Maybe there's a way we could do it so it's pretty vague and larger understanding and not so specific to each tenant or something, but we'll see.
Deputy Mayor.
So long-term, do you see this, how it maybe leading the city towards a planned use ordinance or some sort of master plan?
I think that's
On
a
the property?
possibility. But it's really going to be up to, how all the chips land when we get done with the report, developers' interests, property owners' interest, and council, public's interest. I mean, if, let's say that the plan doesn't prepare a product that the property owner wants or council wants, then we'll definitely come back and regroup and re-strategize.
Okay, thanks.
I look at this, we got one shot at this, because we're not going to do it again. And we've got to develop it the best way that we see for the future of our city. And we don't get a do-over. So I hope we put a lot of thought into this. Anything else? Thank you.
7 thumbs up?
7 thumbs up.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, actually, we'll probably should do a motion to authorize the city manager to enter into a contract with O'Connor Consulting Group LLC to conduct
Right.
a feasibility study on alternate Lake Point project, not to exceed $60,000.
I so move.
Second.
Moved and second. Any further discussion? Clerk, please take the roll.
Councilmember Marshall?
Yes.
Councilmember Curtis?
Yes.
Mayor Baker?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Herbig?
Yes.
Councilmember Danuski?
Yes.
Councilmember Shrubnik?
Yes.
Councilmember Smith?
Yes.
Passes 7-0. All right, next item on the agenda is resolution number 19-324, approving the 2019 King County Comprehensive Solid Waste Management Plan for King County Solid Waste System. Ms. Owsley with Dorian Waller, and I don't see Pat McGoffin here tonight. Did he bail on you guys?
Good evening, Council. You have before you the resolution approving the King County Solid Waste System Management Plan for the King County Solid Waste System. Now, Kenmore is one of 37 cities parties to an interlocal agreement with King County for solid waste. And under that interlocal and also state law, this plan, which was adopted by the King County Council in the spring of this year, needs to be reviewed by the cities who are parties to the interlocal agreement. And we have the opportunity to do that between now and middle of September. And after it is 75% of the population of the cities who have acted on reviewing the plan is completed, the Department of Ecology will review the plan. And that's all as per state law. And the final approval of the plan is expected by later this year in November. So obviously, this is a plan that has been worked on for a long time. Pleased to have Dorian Waller and John Walsh with us tonight to give you a briefing on the plan. Now, a couple of weeks ago, we had the PSE franchise agreement in front of council, and I thought that was the largest agenda bill that we've seen in a long time. This one was bigger because the plan itself is 400 pages long. So, but a lot of good work has gone into it, and we look forward to hearing from Dorian and John about the plan.
Dory, if I could just
If you
get
could
you to
speak
turn your
up a little,
microphone on.
please.
Thank you. I didn't tell you that.
Light
Thanks.
needs to be on and closer to your mouth.
Okay, perfect. Again,
Yeah, there you go.
good evening. I'm Dorian Waller. I'm joined with my colleague, John Walsh, who is the strategy program manager for solid waste. We're here today to talk to you about the King County Comprehensive Solid Waste Management Plan. Pat sends his regrets, and we're thankful he does because he is sick. He actually has a stomach flu, and we encouraged him to not come. So hence why he's not here. And also, Meg wanted me to tell you hi. Before she actually officially retired a little over a week ago.
Yeah.
So as well. So
Thank you.
again, yeah, absolutely. So I want to just give you the opportunity to hear us talk about the plan and answer any questions that you could have prior to taking action. So let's get started. So the plan, as you know, covers the entire system. The system is, of course, the actual 37 cities in King County, not including Seattle or the cities of Milton. Seattle is in its own system, and Milton is a part of the Pierce County system as well. As a fact, you can see we cover a lot of ground, including the unincorporated areas of the county as well. In 2017, we handled over 900,000 tons of garbage. So at the very least, we are extremely active, especially within our public and private partnerships. King County itself does not actually haul out the waste. You, as you are aware, will contract with the hauler, who in turn has an agreement with us where they bring it to the local transfer station, and from there we haul Jurgen waste to your Jurgen landfill as well. And so essentially along with that, this comp plan is concentrating on three main areas: disposal, transfer services, and recycling as well. So recycling, that is something that we really love talking about, because we have, as a county as a whole, we have one of the country's highest rates of recycling throughout this entire country. And we are proud to have this current rate at 54%, and Kenmore currently has a rate of roughly 54% of recycling for single-family homes as well. So you're in line with the county average. Some cities are higher here or there, but overall, a number of cities, especially in South King County, have a much lower rate. So the comp plan concentrates on how to actually address that inequity and address how can we together increase the rate of recycling throughout the county as well. We have actually developed a campaign called the Recycling Right campaign, for which a number of cities are actually a part of, and that campaign is actually there to encourage the best practices for every homeowner, as well as a renter, as well as cities and also companies as well. Our goal is to see this rate continue to climb, because it climbed dramatically from the early to the mid-90s, from 20-something% to roughly 40%. And since the mid-90s, it has slowly increased. And so the cities have all come together to see how can we kickstart this actual process to achieve the 75% goal rate as well. Because in general, we have roughly 140 trucks every day that actually dump waste at our landfill. And our intent is to actually greatly reduce that actual rate of truck traffic, just so that the products can get back into the actual stream as well. So transfer services. So as you are aware, Houghton transfer station is very out of date. It was actually built around the time that the landfill opened up in the mid-60s. It is also our second or third, it really depends on, frankly, the week. It is the second or third busiest transfer station in the actual system. However, there are a number of services that Houghton does not offer that a number of other transfer stations do. Houghton, for once, does not offer a full suite of recycling services like Shoreline Transfer Station. So a lot of trash that is handled through Houghton simply is not being recycled. And so, and we're currently going to to build a new transfer station in South County, where in Algona, which is actually just as big as Holton, was also built around the same time. And we're in the process of, again, starting a design and plan to have the South County transfer station online by 2023. And our goal is to continue this effort and have the Northeast area also have a new transfer station as well. The new transfer station, as in fact you can see, and that's a picture of the Victoria station, and that opened up in 2017. It is enclosed. A lot of the traffic, the average citizen just won't see. It actually controls sound and also smell as well. And Holton currently, unfortunately, I like to describe to people that Holton is a very large carport. It's essentially any and all things that you can imagine being brought to a transfer station can be seen, heard, and smelled through Holton. And we feel, coming from a very equity lens, it's time for the Northeast to have a modern transfer station as well. And this comp plan addresses that actual need.
Where is this transfer station located?
So essentially,
I mean, this one here in the picture.
of Victoria. So it's
Oh, that's
yes,
Victoria.
Victoria. So we are currently starting to meet with the actual core cities in the actual Northwest to start discussing how the siting process should go as well. And so over the next couple of weeks and months, other cities around the Northeast should start hearing from us as well. And I'm proud to say that a number of those core cities have already approved the comp plan, and that includes the city of Redmond and Woodinville as well, have already approved the comp plan. Kirkland is scheduled to take on a comp plan literally next week.
So in reality, the only siting that could be really feasible would be Redmond, Kirkland, or Woodinville for
Yeah, so
this
essentially,
Northeast station.
yes, and also possibly some Mammoth as well, because we're seeing the growth out there starting to go slightly east. And so as a part of again, that actual siting study area, we're also including that actual city in it as well.
Yeah, my concern is a little closer so that we're not running through our city with trucks heading to Shoreline.
Yes, yes.
when we could have a
However,
station that's closer.
yes, sorry. And however, Kirkland has continued to express an interest in hosting a new station as well. However, simply through the actual SEPA process, we have to have this siting process as well.
Right.
So.
I know they've offered a site, so.
Oh, yes, they have, over and over again. Yes, yes, they have, actually, yes. So, I'm sorry. Sorry, yes.
No, please.
So is the Houghton site not big enough? Is that the issue? Why it can't be reconfigured?
Well, no, it's not that it's not large enough. It's just simply out of date. And so essentially, similar to the new Victoria station, the old Victoria station was similar to Houghton, and it needed just simply be rebuilt in order to accommodate future growth, because these stations are actually designed for a 25 to 30-year life cycle. So just envisioning those service areas continuing to grow.
So, and I probably wasn't clear when I said that. When I said it wasn't big enough, I meant the site itself. Is the site big enough to handle, if it were a modern facility constructed on it, is it adequate?
So essentially, so Houghton, there's a closed landfill behind the station. And so we have started exploring quite possibly just building a new station on the current area and extending into the landfill area as well. So it is an actual option.
I hope so, and the reason I say part of it is maybe just selfish, because it is closer than having to go to Sammamish for a lot of our residents. Obviously, Shoreline is not far away, but just from the NIMBYism and everything that will go with trying to locate a new site, the Houghton neighbors have been there. They know they moved next to a landfill or a transfer station, and to me, it just seems, I know this is your work, it's not what I do, but it just seems from a practical standpoint, it's right off the freeway, it just seems so logical to try to reutilize an existing site in an area that will be void of one.
Understandable, and as I've stated, Kirkland has enthusiastically encouraged us to how to build it there, but simply for its citing processes, we do have to just expand and seek it out. However, our staff have started exploring what would a new station in that actual area actually look like.
Well, especially the way Shoreline turned out. I mean, that's a LEED Platinum facility.
It is, yes.
And it fits in really well, and so, yeah, I'm with Brent.
And I will say that we do at times have challenges trying to cite somewhere else. So usually our luck is usually where we already exist at. So I'll leave it right there.
Yeah, I've watched a number of,
Yeah, I'll leave it right there.
I've watched a number of sites get updated with Bow Lake and Shoreline,
Yeah.
and Factoria, and I think there was one other one, but in any event.
Yeah. So again, a process that's just started off talking with the host cities, and eventually we'll start speaking with the actual advisory committees, as well as other interested parties, including Sound Cities Association as well. So this is a process that's just starting up and hoping to have it come full circle later this year through 2020. So the last large topic is of course disposal and extending the life of the actual landfill. We feel since we have operated the landfill ever since the 60s that we have experience with landfilling and knowing that there is one last area of the landfill that can be used for, again, disposal of waste is actually something that we feel very strongly about, knowing that after it closes, and we have already started exploring the process of what does disposal look like after the actual landfill closes. We are actually proud of how well we have learned how to landfill, and gas is actually collected from the landfill. It's cleaned and it's sold to PSC, and last year we actually generated revenues of $8 million off the gas from the landfill. So we have done well, and understand that we have one last area that's called Area 9, that if the plan is approved, Area 9, it would go kind of where you see the white structures that up sort of towards the top right of the actual picture right there. Currently, we should be opening the current Area 8 should start opening any actual time now. It was approved last week, so if you want, I could send you an invite to the ribbon cutting for Area 8. Okay. No one chuckled at that one. So
When I started with the Solid Waste
Yes.
Advisory Committee
Yes.
back in 2006, Cedar Hills was supposed to
Yes.
close in
Yes.
2010,
Yeah.
2012.
Yeah.
It's just kept on being extended and extended.
Mm-hmm.
It's now in the late 20s, isn't it, that they're saying it's supposed to close?
yes, so then Area 8, it will take us to the mid to late 20s, and Area 9, if the comp plan approved, it'll take us through the mid 30s up to 2040. I would say in a lot of ways it's driven by our economy and quite honestly how well or efficiently we have learned how to landfill. And so essentially, at the end of the day, yes, I have learned that in the past, it's been told that it would close this year, and so forth. But again, at this point, Area 9 is the last part of usable land at the actual landfill, and after it closes, it closes. Yes. So as I mentioned, after it closes, there are options about how to actually dispose of waste. One is, of course, putting on rails, similar to Snohomish County, as well as the city of Seattle puts their waste on a rail that actually goes outside of the county. Another option is, of course, a waste to energy plant, for which we of course have the site and so forth. And we're also open to other actual technologies as well, how to dispose of the waste as well. But given that the landfill, we know will finally start closing over the next 10 to 20 years, we have to start the process of what we will start doing as soon as possible. So our council has instructed us to actually develop a study on what options are actually feasible and how soon can we actually get it online as well after the landfill closes. And also, as a part of the comp plan, our council also approved a few amendments as well to the comp plan to address any concerns that the county heard from cities, our haulers, as well as again, the landfill neighbors as well. For instance, its use of the actual 1,000-foot buffer around the landfill. This amendment addresses the fact that we cannot dispose of waste within that 1,000-foot buffer. We have learned that early on in the landfill's life, the county, and we don't have any reasoning on why, was starting to dispose of waste in that 1,000-foot buffer, and we have over the years started to take that waste out of there as well. Another is actually addressing how to handle the actual the bird population of the landfill. I don't know if when any of you have had the chance to see the landfill, but there's a lot of wildlife there, including eagles. It's a beautiful sight. I understand there's trash there, but it's a beautiful sight seeing the eagles. However, the council would like us to develop a plan on how to actually, control the population and not harm the actual population as well. Another is addressing the actual top lift. So essentially, a landfill cell or area, the way it is designed, I like to say it's like a jigsaw puzzle. It just isn't a deep hole that truck just drives in the back and drops it off and leaves, but it's essentially an actual sort of cut and cover approach of where waste is disposed of in various cells in an area. And so after an area is closed, a top lift has to be over that actual area. So our council is asking us to actually reiterate on how we are addressing this as well as honoring our actual settlement agreement of where we will not go above 788 feet over at areas 5, 6, and 7, for which we haven't, but the council has asked us essentially to actually prove it as well. Another one is actually, as I mentioned before, having a work plan for life after the landfill closes. Our sixth amendment is exploring with our roads division on, is there any way that we can actually develop a fee that solid waste will actually pay for usage of the roads around the landfill and also transfer station as well. And lastly is sending our current annual landfill report that we currently send to our actual state and county regulators, but start to send that report to the county council every year as well. So currently the plan, as in fact you can see, this plan has not been updated ever since 2001. So I like to tell people now's the opportunity for our plan to officially graduate high school. So it's been 18 years. And so essentially the process started in 2016 and we are towards the end of the process. As again, Nancy has pointed out, cities now have the opportunity to take action or not. And you have until September 16th of where an ecology will then weigh in as well. And ecology has 45 days, which ends on, of all days, Halloween. So again, this process has been ongoing for a number of years. And so essentially, as I already have mentioned, you have 120 days to take action, and it is essentially 75% of the populations of the cities that have acted within that 120-day period will actually decide the fate of the comp plan. And as I mentioned, Woodinville, Bothell, and Redmond has already taken action, as well as cities of Black Diamond and also Bellevue as well. So, and we're doing a number of briefings every week, and so we're expecting to hear from all those councils as it moves on as well. So I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
Questions? Councilmember Curtis?
Partially in jest, but partially in truth. I really love recycling, and I do composting on my own property, but it seems to me like more and more of the plastic containers nowadays don't have the little recycle number, and it's really bugging me. To throw that thing in the garbage just drives me crazy. So because two plastic things that look the same, unless they have a number on the bottom, it doesn't help me. So is there a move afoot that less recycled plastic is being used? And then the second one is, at my age, reading those little symbols on the bottom is becoming progressively harder. So if they could make them bigger or bolder, or Braille, I don't know what they need to do, but right now I'm having a harder time finding those silly things. I really, really like recycling.
Yeah. So I'm not sure about if there's less recycled content going into products. I don't believe so. I mean, it seems like they're promoting it more and more that it is made out of post-consumer recyclable products. As far as the numbers, I think there is a trend that it is kind of confusing people about what the numbers mean, and so maybe that's why they're getting rid of the numbers, just to show that you just have the three circle areas so people know to recycle it. But yeah, people are just kind of confused when they hear the numbers. Especially with China Sword or the green fence. So 3 through 7s are harder to recycle, and so that might be another movement to kind of reduce the confusion over should you be putting in the recycle bin or the trash can based on the number. So I don't think we can change how big the the image is on the thing, but I know we've been talking about with producer responsibility type stuff, and so that might be another thing to consider is can producers actually do some better marketing of that on their products. But.
Is there any thoughts on how you're going to get the multifamily buildings more involved in the recycling program? I think one of the problems is the area where the containers are stored, the trash receptacles are stored, is not small enough to handle two large containers, one for regular garbage and compost and the recycling. So any plans to do anything?
Yes, so in saying, I'm glad you asked, actually, because we have actually began talking to cities about ways that they can actually address those issues, but by essentially having stronger code enforcement practices, as well as actually getting to developers early about you actually guiding how they actually design that actual process of having the actual containers available and visible as well.
Yeah, but already existing
Yes.
multifamily units, there is no place for a second big container.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you propose to get around that? I mean, we can enforce all we want to, but if there's no place for them to throw it or dispose of it, how's that going to work?
At the end of the day, I can say that we don't know how to address that actual issue in itself, but we have noticed that the city of Kirkland has done a great job of engaging current owners about this actual practice as well. So,
Okay.
Yeah, City of Kirkland did a presentation at our SWAC or MISWAC meeting.
Yep.
So they have a presentation online that kind of outlined all of their steps. I mean, we can share that with you if you want, but I mean,
Yeah.
it seemed to improve their
We
recycling.
got Penny Sweet on the SWAC.
Yeah, so.
She took my place. So. All right. Any further questions? Councilmember Shrevenick.
I just have a little one. Along the kind of personal question side of recycling, there's also indication on some items now that they're like only in commercial recycling facilities, and so are those the type of thing that goes in the bin in our houses or not? I assume not, but.
Yeah, do you have an example of one of these? You mean the compostable food packaging? Yeah, we're working with Cedar Grove on that right now to clarify some confusion around if that should go in the green bin or not. So, yeah.
All right. Any other comments, questions? So the chair will entertain a motion to approve resolution number 19-324, approving 2019 King County Comprehensive Solid Waste Management Plan for King County Solid Waste System. And I even worked on this when it first started. It's been going on a long time.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is
Who,
there
who was our second? Oh, thank you.
any further questions or discussion? Motion in front of us is to approve resolution number 19-324, approving the 2019 King County Comprehensive Solid Waste Management Plan for King County Solid Waste System. Clerk, please take the roll.
Councilmember Marshall?
Yes.
Mayor Baker?
Yes.
Councilmember Smith?
Yes.
Councilmember Danuski?
Yes.
Councilmember Curtis?
Yes.
Councilmember Shrubnik?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Herbig?
Yes.
Tell Pat we didn't need him at all.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Next item on the agenda is North Shore Park and Recreation Services Area Proposed Ballot Measure. I don't, oh, there he is, hiding there. Mr. Lancaster, our graduate intern.
So I've had the opportunity over the past couple weeks to work on something that's been going on with the North Shore Parks and Recreation Service Area. And Councilmember Joel Marshall is a member, I believe, a member of that board and has been familiar with that. And any holes that I don't fill in, hopefully Rob can jump in and help me out. But we just wanted to give you an update about what's going on right now with the senior center and also with the ballot measure to renew the property tax levy that they currently have and raise it. So right now, their current levy is 1 cent, or approximately it's about I could look at the exact, I think it's in the memo. It's slightly below 1 cent, but it's about 1 cent per $1,000 of assessed valuation. And they raise about $300,000 in property taxes per year, and that is used to pay off bonds that they have that were used to construct the senior center in Bothell. And Kenmore residents were a part of that, were served by that senior center, even though we have a senior center here in Rhododendron Park. And Kenmore has been helping fund that and gives money to NPRSA every year of a couple $1,000s. But within this past year, there's some needed improvements at the senior center. It's in, especially, it's all come to a head recently. They have, from an informal assessment, there was about $2.7 million of repairs that need to be made. But recently, we've been working, Kenmore, our share, we've been working to get a contract signed, which was just signed a couple days ago, to do an official facilities assessment with a consultant to get a real idea of what that value is. Hopefully by July 17th, so that way when the board moves forward with approving ballot language and getting it on the November ballot, to get a new levy at 3 cents per $1,000 of assessed valuation, to hopefully have an idea of how much that new levy will be able to cost and be able to fund those improvements. Right now, there's about $55,000 of immediate improvements that need to be made for safety reasons. One being a fire service door and others being carpet that's a tripping hazard. And there's a couple other things like a bathroom that has some water underneath in the foundation that's been still for a while. And the North Shore Parks and Recreation Service Area came to the cities and counties that are part of the interlocal agreement that funds them to ask for that money to make those immediate repairs this year. And it came before council, and council approved to move forward with our share, but that hasn't gone to them yet because all for them to use our money that we've approved to give to them, all of the members of the interlocal agreement have to agree to contribute, but 2 of the members, King County and Snohomish County, chose not to do that. And so they haven't gotten that money from us. There's been some discussion about different ways that we could still contribute, potentially a three-way interlocal agreement between the three cities to still fund those improvements, but nothing has gone forward with that yet. But just so you know, coming up on they're having a meeting on the 17th. They're going to be discussing that ballot language and also raising the levy to 3 cents. It would approximately raise, if I remember right, 3 times that, about $900,000 per year. And they're hoping that'll be enough to be able to pay for those improvements over time. How this affects Kenmore residents, it would be a property tax increase for our residents from the 1 cent to 3 cents. And then also, whether it passes or not, it could affect our residents' availability and safety at that senior center. So those are just some things to keep in mind, kind of how it affects us. Is there anything that I'm missing? I feel like that's a main summary of what's going on.
Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, I appreciate all this. I, just speaking for myself, was caught a little off guard when I first heard that the board was looking at going to the ballot so quickly. I would be much more open to looking at kind of a more holistic solution to not just the senior center, but expanding out to possibly include like a regional pool or something like that, looking at an MPD that would include the 3 cities, which we can't do if MPRSA is still in effect. And so I'm a little concerned with the sudden renewal of assuming that the levy gets renewed. That is going to necessitate that an MPRSA exists until the bonds, because I assume they'll be bonding for all of this, are paid off in 20 years or 15 years, whenever they do that. And that precludes, or at least makes it a lot more difficult, correct me if I'm wrong, for the cities to pursue in a metropolitan parks district at some later time to do something like a regional pool or some other larger venture. Because right now this is very much tied to the senior center, which serves an important purpose, and I appreciate everything it's doing. But I think we could be doing more as a 3-city collective with something a little more ambitious like an MPD rather than how limited MPRSA is. So I'm just a little concerned, but thank you for putting this together.
I forgot to mention that the bond retires in 2021, the current one they have, just to give you a timeline for that.
But I assume that if they're tripling what they're taking in, then the plan would be to bond to do the $2 million of
Yes.
other improvements, which
Yeah.
would then necessitate some lengthening or some new
Yeah.
bonds that would be
Yeah,
paid off in 10
if I could add to that, it is a 6-year levy though, and so whatever they did would have to be done within a 6-year period. Another option is to do a bond measure for the district that would be like a 20-year bond measure, but they're not choosing to do that. They're choosing to do a 6-year levy. So any improvements they would do would have to be completed within the 6 years.
Okay.
And I guess I'm really concerned because there's been no assessment done. We don't really know the exact cost of the repairs that need to be done. And there hasn't been a feasibility study done. There's been nothing. They're just going out with a bond with no idea of whether this is enough to actually cover the cost of the repairs and the maintenance. So, it seems like you're trying to put the cart before the horse here. You ought to know what you're getting money for to fix. So anyway, Councilmember Smith and Curtis.
Do you know, I know the underlying bond, it expires and is paid off in 2021, as you had stated in here, but do you know, does this take effect before that, and if it does it pay off the existing debt on the underlying bond?
I'm not exactly clear on that, exactly how the timeline would figure out when the new property tax would come in, but I'd imagine the funds that would come in would go first to retiring the current bond and then to paying off any future needed improvements.
Okay, and then the other question, so if it's $900,000 a year and they've identified, and it's 6 years, so we're talking over $5 million, and they've identified $2.7 million in capital improvements. Do you know where the additional money is, what it's being used for?
So, no, and that's part of going to what Mayor Baker said. A lot of the nuts and bolts of getting a capital improvements plan and actual like dates and times for when those would be made, the, going out for getting consultants and bids and everything, that hasn't actually been done. That's part of what Rob has instructed me to do, and this is something that we're doing without the board's instruction, but it's something that we feel should be looked at. I'm working on a 6-year business plan for what that levy would be used for. And also, we're hopefully going to work with some of the other cities that are in the district about an alternatives analysis, that if the measure doesn't pass or something like that, that we have something to fall back on. So there's a little bit more research done about what alternatives are, whether an NPD is an option. But that's something that we're looking into, is exactly how that money would be used if they did go forward with that levy.
Could it be possibly a reasonable middle ground in here where instead of, so I don't know if there is a minimum on a term, but could it be half as long and half as much? And so what I'm getting at is if we know that this just, I realize a rough estimate is 2.7 million, but that also happens to be half of what the 6-year bond would raise. And if it went for 3 years, just to get the core components, that capital issues that need to be addressed, is it possible maybe that it could just be shorter term? Then it doesn't tie up the possibility also, because even if we did look at any other type of districting or metropolitan parks district or whatever it is, nothing's going to happen in the next year or two on that anyway. And so a 3-year might be enough maybe to raise enough money, get what has to be done, and then it allows us to focus on more of a longer-term solution. That's just a thought. And then I'll throw out one final thing. I would really love it if any solution also included something for our senior center in Kenmore, since we will be paying the same amount, the same rate as the other 2 cities, Woodinville and Bothell. Bothell obviously has a senior center, which is what this is all about, right in their downtown. We don't. We're paying the same amount, our citizens, and yet we're also having to pay $25,000 a year to maintain the senior center, plus we're foregoing the value of the rental income at the park. And so we're contributing real dollars right now as a city for our senior center, and yet we're also contributing for something over here in an adjacent city that we don't really, I do think has value, and I do want us to be a part of, but I think it would be fair and reasonable if somehow there was maybe some way it could be structured that improvements could be done to our senior center in our own city.
And I think, so to your first comment on the length of the levy, from my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think if it's a service area, according to state law, I think the levy is 6 years. That's normally what a service area is established for, so I don't know if we'd be able to, at least from my research, I haven't seen anything, so I don't know if Dawn could correct me. From what I think, I don't think we can truncate that to 3 years. But then also regarding our senior center, I don't know if that's underneath, so from my understanding when talking to Brian, our accountant, it's owned by the North Shore Senior Center, and we pay them to do programming and stuff like that there, or they run it, they run the operations there. And I don't know if MPRSA owns that, or if that's something that they would be contributing to. So I don't think it'd be part of the bond measure. It'd fall underneath their umbrella to be doing improvements there.
Maybe an option is that maybe it's a long-term lease with the North Shore Senior Center, and they take over more of the programming aspect and the responsibility for it, and so that it becomes something that they have more of a vested interest in. It may be an option worth considering. For me, it's a simple fact that I just look at it, it's like, Bothell, not only will they pay the same rate, they have the senior center right in their downtown, easier access for their citizens. Our citizens don't have that. It's their money, it's our citizens' money that's maintaining our senior center, and we have less accessibility to the one we're paying for in this tax rate. So there's some fundamental issues that I have with it, but I don't deny the need at all, and I hope it gets addressed.
Councilmember Marshall and Councilmember Curtis.
Had you spoken to the intern that the NPRSA engaged?
Yep.
Okay, great.
So
That's-
Marco's been integral in giving us the information that we need to put this together and also in helping get the contract for the official facilities assessment for July 17th. Hopefully we'll have some numbers to look at to see if the bond measure will be able to cover that. But yeah, so we've been working with them, NPRSA's intern, to get this information.
Councilmember Curtis.
So what I'm wrestling with is, and it might be a discussion for us for budget, so it might not be part of this, but our senior center, so at this point, we're paying $25,000 for a really old building that I think is approaching the end of its lifetime. And do we as a city want to commit to maintaining some structure indefinitely to house this? And I'm not sure we do. So it feels like if we're paying $2,500 right now to the regional senior center and $25,000 for ours, we're paying 10 times more. And I don't have a good sense what are the programs there. I'm pretty familiar with the senior center in Bothell. They have exercise programs, food programs, they have all kinds of programs. It is a great location for seniors. And I just, other than being a social gathering place, I don't have any sense what services we actually provide from our location. So it feels to me like we're paying a lot for potentially very little service. So other than being convenient, I just don't know if we're getting our money's worth on our senior center. And on the one hand, I'd hate to lose it because then people have to travel farther. But if we're paying a lot of money and not getting much, then that needs to be considered, especially the long term. What would a building cost us to maintain? So I don't have the answers to that, and it feels like it's probably a budget thing, but somehow it's an important part of this discussion.
Your Honor, a couple things. We can ask Kinnan Williams, the attorney that's been supporting us on this, about whether you can go less than 6 years, do something shorter, so we can ask that. But this was mainly a situation update to you. If you wanted to, you could take what you've discussed here tonight and give some guidance to Councilmember Marshall, who represents you at the NPRSA board on July 17th. So if there's any guidance you want to give him for the next board meeting, I think now's a good time. You could also take it up again on July 15th, 2 days before the next NPRSA board meeting.
Councilmember Shrubnik.
Yeah, I guess I assumed that that's kind of what we were doing here, is providing some guidance around the questions that Councilmember Marshall might bring up at the meeting. In particular, somehow the inclusion of the Kenmore Senior Center into this mix, and the possibility of, truncating to 3 years. But moreover, just the haste at which this is being proposed without thought and without analysis. And I think you can always find ways to spend $900,000 a year. And that would be my other concern, is that, if they've already put, a figure on this of 0.03 per thousand, the analysis is probably going to figure out a way to spend that, and that's the tail wagging the dog. So it is frustrating. I mean, I just concur with what everybody else has said, that it's frustrating to see this move forward in this way prior to analysis.
Councilmember Danuski.
Do you expect that we would have the feasibility study before the meeting on the 15th?
It would be hard to get a solid feasibility study done before we get numbers from the consultants about how much money is actually needed in repairs for the senior center.
Has the feasibility study even been ordered?
The
No.
paperwork on it just got signed just the other day, and they're going to have to work lightning speed just to get preliminary numbers to the NPRSA board on the 17th.
Yeah.
Councilmember Marshall, what was the tenor there at the meeting, that that they wanted to rush to the ballot with this without getting solid data.
I missed that meeting, but I understand that it was Councilmember Dembowski who made, or at least was a proponent of the idea. And then the idea is that there's certainly enough expense thus far, and the general deterioration of the facility was enough for justification. But I wasn't there. But I've been duly taking notes as to every single comment here tonight. So if there's any more, I find myself almost in the position of staff at times, right? What is the direction then? I see your challenge and appreciate it with a new light.
So I really think the Kenmore Senior Center is a separate discussion. And if you're going to try to cut funding the Kenmore Senior Center, I really suggest that you go and see what they do and the number of programs they offer, because they have a lot of programs over there. And I think, as most of you know, I've been very active for the last 7 or 8 years with that senior center and talking with the seniors monthly. So I think that would be horrible for our community just to cut funding on that senior center, because it is very well used and there's a lot of programs there.
Hey, Mr. Mayor?
Councilmember Smith.
Just so you know, I brought it up not because I want to cut it, but because I'm looking at it from a financial equity standpoint.
Oh, I understand.
And what our citizens pay versus the neighboring city. And so that was my point.
But, yeah, but I would hope that both of you would go look and see what actually goes on over there before. Councilmember Curtis.
And I'm also not saying it should be cut, but somehow we should get credit for what we're doing. It should be seen as a senior program with 2 locations. Instead of we're funding the Bothell location, they're ignoring us.
And the funny thing is, we do give the money to the Bothell location that gives it back to Kenmore minus,
Minus 25,000 somehow.
minus
I mean-
something.
Huh?
Minus a fee. Sort of like the Department of Transportation does for our road projects. They take their fee. All right. Any other questions on this report? Okay. Thank you very much for that report. And now, potential lodging tax, another report. You're just really going to town here. You're earning your keep.
Hopefully I'm being abused. So when I first got here, Rob instructed me to look into lodging tax policy and what it would look like in Kenmore and the process that would need to go through to adopt one and the things that would need to happen, especially since the new lodge is being built at St. Edward's Park. And most cities in the area that have a large lodge or hotel of that size have adopted a lodging tax. So just comparing ourselves to other cities, seeing what they've done, and also kind of seeing what would be required, and even if it's something council wants to think about or ponder on. So that's what this presentation will be about, and I'll go over and try and hopefully educate you of some of what I've learned in my research. So just an overview, we're going to go through the different types of lodging taxes, what that tax funds, the revenues that I raise can be used for, what King County and other cities have done, a revenue forecast of what that may look like for our city if one was adopted, the Lodging Tax Advisory Committee, which is an integral part in how this tax works, and then recommendations, which is more an analysis of kind of the situation that we're standing in. So currently Kenmore has 2 taxes that apply to lodging within the city right now. Our sales tax, all lodgings are required to pay the sales tax of 0.096. There's special hotel and motel taxes, which we don't have one, and that's the one that we're talking about tonight. There's the Convention and Trade Center tax, which all cities in King County have. The city collects it, but that money goes to the Department of Revenue, and it's used for convention and trade centers within the county. So we don't get that money. It's not something we personally get. We just collect it within the city. And then there's tourism and promotion area taxes, which can be established, but currently Kenmore isn't a part of one of those, so we don't have to worry about that. And we're going to focus on special hotel and motel taxes tonight. So what is this tax? It's a consumer tax on lodging charges for periods of less than 30 consecutive days for hotels, motels, rooming houses, private campgrounds, all those different types of things, even short-term rentals, online listings. We talked a little bit about that a couple weeks ago. And this tax is collected from consumers, and it's paid on the business excise tax return. And this can be used for what's the lingo in the industry is heads and beds. So the funds that are collected from this tax can only be used to promote tourism activities, whether it be infrastructure or buildings for tourism, or events or activities that bring people from outside of the area in, or something that's new that isn't being promoted as much, but something that should be brought before your attention is it can be used on general obligation bonds and revenue bonds for affordable workforce housing within a half mile of a transit station. So that's something new as of 2015. And King County actually has a separate mandate than what cities have, to where they're supposed to be using, I think, about 70% of their lodging tax funds by 2021 on affordable housing. So there has been a shift in that direction to use some of these funds for affordable housing. An idea of what some of those things in Kenmore, the fireworks show that just happened a while ago, that would qualify. The summer concerts would qualify, and also movie nights. These are just some of the things in town that those funds, if the city were to levy that tax, it could be used for. So legislation allows for this tax to be levied up to 2%, but something interesting is it can only be, the total tax rate on lodgings of all taxes combined can only be 12%. So we're in a special unique situation in King County because of that convention and trade center tax. All cities in King County can only really levy this tax up to 1%, or we would exceed that 12% level. So that's why if you look, most cities around us in King County that levy this tax only do so to 1%. In the memo, I attached a detailed listing of all cities within King County and what their lodging taxes are. This 1% counts as a credit against the state sales tax as well, so they won't be double taxed in that way. And then also, if the county charges their own tax and we do, our tax counts as a credit against theirs. So that way, if they won't be double taxed by the county and then us. But that's an important distinction to realize, because if we don't levy the tax, the county will be levying that tax, and they'll be collecting funds and using it as well. So really it becomes a question of local control, of whether the county, the lodgings within our city, will still be paying that tax. It'll just be used at a county level, whereas if we levied it, we'd be able to make decisions at the local level of how that funding was used. Residents would still be being benefited, whether it be at a county level or a local level. So just a quick forecast. This is estimated. A lot of the information about the revenue of hotels and motels within the city, right now there's going to be the Lodge, and then there's Kenmore Motel. A lot of that information is private, so these are just estimated numbers based on general average revenues from the industry, and also average vacancy rates of about 66.2%. So looking through this and looking at what the potential revenues of the Lodge would be and what the potential revenues of the motel would be, and also the short-term rental forecast that we did a little while ago when we talked about short-term rentals, it totals anywhere between about $58,000 and $64,000 a year. So it's not a huge sum of money, but it's, you know, a good little pot to work with. But to use any of these funds, the council needs to work with a lodging tax advisory committee, or an LTAC. This committee has to have 5 members, 2 members from businesses that are taxed. So these are general managers of lodges, or for example, owner of a short-term rental would count. 2 members who are involved in tourism type activities. So these could be businesses that bring tourism to the area, or people that plan large events or activities that bring people to the area. And then normally 1 elected official from the council to stand in and help. But they don't vote, they're just there to talk and discuss and bring the council's wishes there. Once a year, they have to submit a report of how those funds are used to the Joint Legislative Audit Committee. And they also normally approve grants or make recommendations to council of how those funds can be used. The council can choose to use funds in excess or below what that council recommends, but the council can only use funds for projects that have been approved by the LTAC. So they're really integral in how that fund's getting used. And the thought behind it is that way we can ensure that the funds are being used for heads and beds, or approved uses of that tax fund. So just an idea of how much it would cost to staff and support that committee. This is in talking to Shauna Pitts. She's a member of the LTAC in Bothell. I had a detailed interview with her talking about what it took to get it started, how it felt to be a member of that committee, how hard it is to staff. Even in Bothell, they have a hard time finding people to fill those positions. But it took for Bothell about a half part-time, full-time equivalent to staff them, to prepare the reports, to review grants, and to help run their meetings. But it's actually evolved since then. That was just when they started. Now and they had about the same amount of funds when they started as we would bring in, but that's grown to almost 400,000, and now they have a full-time tourism manager that works for the city that supports them. So it can take quite a lot of staff time to help support this committee. And examples of members of the committee, like I said, are general managers, Airbnb hosts, local business owners, like somebody from the brewery or stand-up paddleboarding, or some of those people could take part in that committee. So really, I don't have a recommendation for you, but I guess the important thing to consider is that local control component. Is local control important enough to council? And is tourism a big enough issue in town that we want to dedicate significant staff time to assisting and working with an LTAC committee? And if so, if those things are important enough to council, a lodging tax would be advisable, because that way we can choose within our city to fund some of the things that we already do, could take some pressure off the general fund budget, and could really promote tourism in our city at a local level.
And Your Honor, if I could just add one or two things. In the memo that Ryan prepared, talks about how all revenue collected needs to go through the LTAC as far as how to spend it. But it is an advisory committee. The A in LTAC stands for advisory, and therefore the city council makes the final decision on how lodging tax dollars are spent. And I just want to drive home the point that Ryan made, and that is, if you adopted a lodging tax, it would not result in an increase in taxes paid by the hotel, motel industry. It would just mean that instead of the county getting it, it would come here locally. And given that the lodge at St. Edward will likely be open about this time next year, we wanted to get you at least thinking about whether you wanted to adopt this tax and all that goes with it. Don't necessarily need your direction tonight. If you wanted to give us your thoughts and reactions tonight, you're welcome to. But if you wanted to actually go forward and adopt it, we'd probably need to know by the beginning of the year of 2020 so that we can get things up and running by then, by the time the lodge starts in summer of 2020.
Councilmember Shrevenick?
I have a question and a thought. So the question is about use of the dollars and carryover. Can I assume that you don't have to use all the dollars in the given year that they're, so how, is there any carryover restrictions or?
Not that I could see.
Okay.
It's just earmarked for tourism. And
Yeah.
what happens is people submit applications to the Lodging Tax Advisory Committee on how they would like to use the funds. And then the Lodging Tax Advisory Committee gives recommendations to council to approve.
And do all the do all the expenditures have to align to applications? I mean, could there be any advisory committee initiated projects?
Yes, and if the city, an example, if the city wanted to use those funds for something, the city also has to submit an application to the advisory committee as well.
Okay. And then my thought is, although this wouldn't be a lot of money, particularly after you take out, potentially up to a half-time FTE, it kind of sets the table for potentially, if we had more lodging in the future. Also, it provides us a group that is dedicated to thinking about tourism, which, of people that are, essentially working in the industry in our community. And I think there's some maybe not quantifiable benefit to that, it's not just our staff person that has to be thinking about it all the time. We've got some dedicated people.
And that's one use of the funds I forgot to mention. Funds that are collected by the tax could be used to fund staff time to support that committee.
Yeah,
Can use
sure,
it.
yeah.
I forgot to mention that, but yeah.
Councilmember Curtis?
So I'm inclined to not proceed at this time. I'm thinking for the amount of money that comes in, and one just subtract out FTE's time to work on it, and everybody's really busy. To add a project that's not going to have a huge benefit to me just seems like why add the work. And if Bothel's having a hard time finding 5 volunteers, well, the councilperson, I guess, is a volunteer, but finding 5 volunteers, and it sounds like there's a lot of restrictions. So this isn't just going to be an easy to follow rule. There's going to be a lot of stuff to set up, and I just don't think it's worth the effort, at least this time. It's still there in the future, and if at some point we have multiple locations, then I think it'd be worth looking at again. But for right now, I just don't think it's worth investing the time, because I don't think we'll have very much money at net to actually spend on our programs that we'd want to.
Councilmember Danuski?
Yeah, I think this is interesting, but kind of along the same lines as Councilmember Curtis, if we're going to be using, a 0.5 FTE and we're only getting 58,000, I'm wondering if we're going to have enough of a benefit to have, the staff time required and the effort required. So, just
If I could clarify that, it was half of an FTE to begin with. It'd probably be less once things are up and running and going. One, I guess, fear I have, I don't know if fear is the right word, but what 'cause I'm trying to get the overall budget balanced. And so what I would love in Rob's perfect world is for the 58,000 to supplant the programs we're already doing, like the fireworks and the concerts and stuff. I would love it just to supplant the money that we're using for that. But when you get $58,000 of new money coming in and you get this eager, brand new committee with bright eyes, they're going to be expecting that you do more with the 58,000, and that we'll have to do more programs. And again, the applications come in such a way that it doesn't put the burden on the city to do all the new shiny things. Other groups, organizations can do the work in return for the money. But still, I think politically the expectation would be, at least probably with the lodging community and the business community, is that we'd have to do more with the 58,000, not sustain what we're doing now. But who knows?
Councilmember Marshall?
Yeah, you definitely read my mind, and it could be used for the city's budget benefit, at least potentially, to some extent, maybe not to the amount that it's would be taxed at, of the revenue.
Councilmember Smith?
Yeah, I think if you're going to so let me first say, I'm in favor of not doing anything at this time, but I think if you're to pull together a committee, that committee is going to have an expectation, like our city manager said, and to constantly have to battle that, even as a council, because it happens when you have a committee that's only advisory, then they get their feelings hurt when you don't follow their opinion, and it can be a very tough thing, and if you have to have 2 parties that are affected, that means you have to have somebody from the Kenmore Motel and somebody from the lodge. That doesn't give you a lot of leeway on 2 of the committee members right there. And to me,
Airbnb would also count.
oh, that would,
Yeah.
Okay.
About 2 people from the lodge.
Okay, that's true too. But I think I would, as much as I would love to be able to try to figure out how to help fund some of these things, I think waiting makes sense and just not doing anything at this time.
I guess I'd kind of rather be proactive before something opens up here in town. At least have the mechanism in place that would allow us to do it. and not, instead of reacting after the place is opened and doing business, and then all of a sudden we decide, oh, let's put a lodging tax on this. I think we should think about it at the beginning rather than after it's already opened and going. Councilmember Curtis?
See, I don't see the benefit in doing that because they're being taxed already. So the tax is just going somewhere else. We're just taking a portion of that. And out of the 58,000 or whatever, I bet we'd only net 20,000. So I just don't think it's for that amount of money to set up a whole new system, a whole new committee, keep it staffed, interview people. It's just, I think, a lot of work for the minimal return. And if there's not going to be any surprise in Kenmore. If somebody's building a hotel, we're going to know it at least 6 months before it happens. So we'll have plenty of time to bring this back around and put it in place if we want to.
Councilmember Marshall?
I still think it's intriguing, and if we're looking at the lines crossing and really taking a hard look at our budget fairly soon, it's worthwhile to at least check this out and see how much we can save, how much can we spend locally, get the local infusion of our fun activities if we can take away from our own budget spending, just to at least entertain it.
Yeah, I don't think we're in a position to just turn our backs on. Yeah, or 20,000, or who knows what it's going to be. We're assuming that. Could be less. Could be more. You're replacing Alan. Anyway, Councilmember Shrubnik.
How's about? I mean, I kind of hear what folks are saying in terms of, well, is it worth it at this time? I mean, you know, could we kind of say, can we bring this back in a year after we kind of see what the taxes look like? And I mean, is that possible to kind of put a placeholder on it, or?
You bet. You can bring it back anytime you'd like. Yeah.
Okay. There you-
Anybody else? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right. Council member comments, reports, and initiatives. Councilmember Danuski.
Nothing, Dad.
Councilmember Shrubnik.
I just want to promote all the great things happening in Kenmore. This week, we start our summer movies. We start our summer concerts. We have comedy at the Kenmore Community Club on Friday, and the Heritage Society is putting on a concert, a benefit concert, for the pop-up story walk, and that is happening on Sunday. So you could spend every day after Wednesday this week doing something fun in Kenmore.
Councilmember Curtis.
Nothing official, but I will not be here for the Coffee with the Council on Saturday the 20th or the council meeting on July 22nd.
Okay, Councilmember Marshall.
On the solstice, my wife and I had a great run in St. Edward State Park, beating the sunset for a 5 or 6K or whatever it was. And I had forgotten because we hadn't been there around sunset for so long. We got married there. And I had forgotten how beautiful the sunset is when you see a blaze of orange on the green tree, just in like patches, like some artist just dabbed a paintbrush in and put it across the landscapes. Absolutely beautiful, and we didn't trip or get injured or anything.
Councilmember Smith.
Just like to thank the staff for all the work they did on the 4th of July for the fireworks show.
That was a great show, yes.
Pie eating contest at Senior Center. I didn't win. The winner ate 2 pies inside of 3 minutes. Not quite 1. So, if there's no further business come before us, we are adjourned.
To exec session.
Correct.
Oh, yeah, yes. thank you.
Correct.
We're going into exec session pursuant to RCW 42.30.1101 subsection I, It's a potential litigation, and there will be no action taken.
No
Up
final
to-
action.
Up to 30 minutes.
Expect this to last about,
Up to 30 minutes.
up to, we have to say,
No, you can leave earlier if you want to. You can leave earlier if you want, if we get out.
I can what?
Up
City
to-
attorney,
Up to 30 minutes, and if it's less, you can leave, come back in here. Okay, up to 30.
thank you. Up to 30 minutes.